So today I'm gonna do a thrift flip. It's not gonna be anything super dramatic. This is actually probably one of the easiest and simplest flips I've ever done before. So obviously a disclaimer, I'm not a professional sewist. So I kind of just follow my heart. There's obviously techniques and skills that I don't have. I'm just doing it the way I do it. So you can follow along to this video, or if you're just curious on how to do it, it shouldn't be too complicated. Okay, so the garment I'm gonna be flipping today, just this very simple camisole. So I thrifted this 5 years ago at a flea market in Italy. And back then I wore it all the time, so I got some good use out of it, but I noticed in the past few years I just didn't really reach for it anymore. But I didn't want to donate it or get rid of it just because it's sentimental to me, so I thought I would flip it and turn it into something that I'd wear more often. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. It's kind of really shapeless, honestly. So we'll have like sleeves like this, and on the camera, it's looking stupid. I promise this is black. I feel like it's not showing up black on the camera. I'm gonna do sleeves like that and then have this be like the wristlet thing. Whatever, I'm just gonna do it. If it turns out ugly. So the materials I'm using are obviously this shirt, this fabric I got from the thrift store, these little lace pieces. These were pieces from a nitress I had. I cut them off of the nitress, and I'm figuring that I can just use it on the end like a cuff. I'm also going to be using elastic band and black thread and a sewing machine, obviously. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, now we're gonna cut out the pattern for the sleeves. So you're gonna wanna fold your fabric in half, leaving an opening at the top, and the folded side should be on the right. So the first cut we're gonna make is across the shoulder part. So this length, I go 13 inches. I'm just cutting to make a mark. You could use a pen, but I didn't have anything that would draw on my dark fabric. Normally I'd use a pen, but this is a rare occasion. So after you measure your shoulder area, you're gonna measure the length of your sleeve. So we want this to be a little bit longer than our arm because it is a puffy sleeve. So here I'm doing 25 inches, measuring down the folded side of the fabric, just making a little cut. And then on the wrist area, we're gonna measure 9 inches across. And all these measurements are measured for the fabric to be folded. So if once we open up the fabric, that wrist would be 18 inches across. I'm not really measuring anything right now. I'm just using my tape measure to make sure that I'm cutting in a straight angled line. And of course, these measurements you can adapt to yourself. This is just my own pattern that I've created myself, and I use it in all my puffy sleeve shirts. So now I'm using this elastic, and I'm gonna measure my shoulder just by slinging it around like that and stretching it to a comfortable tension. So I don't want it to be too tight on me. And then I'm gonna cut right where my measurement ended. So the next thing I'm gonna do is sew all the raw edges of my cut fabric. And here I'm just doing a rolled hem. So you're literally just gonna roll the fabric over itself and press it down. Normally you'd put pins to keep it in place, but I'm not afraid of needles, but every time I pick up pins, they just make me sweat. Like, I'm so afraid of stabbing myself. So I just risk it and roll as I sew, but feel free to use pins. Okay, so for the wrist area, I'm going to make a gather. So I loosen the tension on my sewing machine. And then you basically just sew a straight line down the wrist, and you're gonna know it's the wrist because it's the shortest end of your fabric lengthwise. So just sew that straight line down and make sure you don't back stitch, because we want this stitch to be able to move in a minute. Okay, so you can see I gave myself ample space on my end tails of the thread, and you're gonna want a lot of space so that you can pull easier. So just take one thread of the two that are there at the end, and you're gonna pull on that thread while slowly sliding the fabric down. And you can see that the fabric starts to gather. And the reason I'm doing this is because my lace, it's elasticized, but it's not that stretchy, so it won't stretch as far as my wrist measurement. So I'm gathering my fabric until it's the same length as the piece of lace I have is fully stretched. So I have to make sure that I stretch that lace as far as it can go. And if your lace was stretchier, you could potentially skip the gathering step, because once you sew it onto the elastic lace, it'll kind of naturally gather on its own. But mine wouldn't really work that way, so this is why I have to do the gathering step. And I'll readjust it every so often just to make sure that the gather is even, because you don't want it to be straight on one side and then all gathered on the end. So yeah, once you're done with that though, you just take the two threads at the end and tie them together just so that it stays in place. Okay, so I actually liked the look of having the edge of the gathered sleeve on the outside of the lace. If you don't like that, turn the lace inside. I don't know how to describe it, so that it's not on the end of the fabric, it's kind of like laying on top of the fabric, and that way you won't have that crimped piece on the outside. But I want it on the outside, so I'm just sewing them like this with the lace on the end rather than folded over like a hot dog. I don't know how else to describe it. And I was trying to leave a little bit of fabric on the ends of each cuff so that when I sew it together, I don't lose too much of the lace. But that's what it looks like so far. I think it looks so cute. Okay, so the next step is to sew a channel on the shoulder area. So the area right across from that we just sewed. We're going to put our elastic in it just to measure the width, and you're just going to make it a little bit bigger than the width of your elastic, and you can pin it in place. I'm just using the markers on my sewing machine as my guide so that I know that I'm sewing an even channel, but make sure that you're sewing at the very bottom so that there's still hollow space in this little piece of fabric. Okay, so now get a pretty big safety pin, the bigger the better, and connect it to the end of your elastic piece. And you're just going to start feeding it into that channel that we've just sewn until you get to the end of the elastic. So we're basically stopping halfway. So once that last tail piece comes in, you're gonna make sure that you sew it on really tight so that it's securely on our fabric. And then you're just going to pick up back where we left off and continue feeding it through the channel. And then you're going to repeat the same process on the other end. Once you get to the very end, sew that elastic piece into place so that it does not go anywhere. Okay, so our sleeve is almost done. Now you're just gonna turn it inside out, put the right sides together, and you're just gonna sew straight down from wrist to basically the armpit of the sleeve. Actually, sorry, I misspoke. You're gonna stop about 3 or 4 inches from the armpit. We need a little bit of space so that we can sew it onto the top. So just sew a straight line from the armpit. Oh my gosh, why do I keep sew a straight line from the wrist up until about 3 or 4 inches from the elasticized end that we just made, okay? Okay, so just trying on the sleeves. Okay, I never thought sleeves could be too puffy, but I'm starting to not really like how this is turning out, but we'll see. Once I sew them to the bodice and make it a little bit more fitted, hopefully I'll like it better. But these are how the cuffs turned out. Isn't that so sweet? I love it. Okay, so I'm just gonna attach it now by sewing the gap I left open onto the natural armpit. So since this was a camisole, it has like where the straps would line up in like a little triangle. So I'm just gonna sew, leaving the lace part out, and just sew the armpits along like that. Yeah. So I'm just lining it up like I explained earlier, and I'm gonna sew along the very edge of the fabric, but not the very edge of the lace. So I'm gonna try to make sure that I'm not getting any lace, because then there will be gaps. It's not gonna really connect well if I sew it that way. And make sure you're back stitching now so that everything stays in place. And if you remember, we left about 3 to 4 inches from where we stopped sewing to the armpit area. You can cut that leftover fabric at an angle, and that's gonna make sewing the armpit easier. If you don't cut it, it's not a big deal. You can cut it afterwards. And the back of the camisole had this elastic in it anyways. So when I'm sewing the sleeve onto the back portion of the shirt, I'm pulling on that elastic so that when I release the tension, the sleeve will gather with it. And you can see I'm doing some crazy hand contortions here. It's all part of the process. I'm not trying to flip anybody off right now. Okay, I finished attaching the sleeves, but I had a styling crisis, and so instead of just sewing the bodice to be fitted, I'm going to detach the lace that's on the bottom. I'm going to sew it into the shape of a corset, kind of, so high on the hips and low on the front like that. I wasn't expecting it to come up this high, but I mean, I like it. So now I'm basically just cutting an inward curve on the sides because I was planning on taking it in. My measurements aren't anything specific. I'm just freestyling it right now. So I have the shirt inside out. I cut that curve, as you can see, and then I just folded it in half so that I can get an equal curve on the other side. I'm going to use the cut I made as a template. And then since the bottom's going to be kind of a triangle shape, I just made a notch where I want the top of my triangle to start, like right there. And I'm just going to cut down. It doesn't have to be perfect because I am going to sew the edges, so it'll look better later. I'm just folding it over again so that I can get an even cut on both sides. Only kept the triangle in the front. For the back, I just cut straight across on that highest portion so that it's higher in the back. And now I'm just cutting straight up about 3/4 into the shirt, up into the bust area. And I'm just going to sew those together to tighten up the shirt more and also give it more of a corseted look. And of course, I forgot to film myself actually sewing this, so the next thing you'll see is the finished product. I hope you like it. This was a lot of fun to make, and I actually love how it turned out. I had a lot of doubts along the way, but I think it looks beautiful now, and I'll definitely reach for this more, especially now that we're entering fall. I think this is gonna be perfect for the season. So thank you for watching, and if you like this, feel free to subscribe and like the video. Okay, goodbye.